31 News.
For more than 2 decades, an Idaho man spent time behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. It was a story profiled by Dateline, first airing in 2012.
And it was that national attention and the efforts of a determined mother that eventually got experts in false confessions and genetic genealogy involved. But it was the help of a librarian in Kirksville, Missouri, who helped tie it all together.
Yeah, so I had a chance to talk to that librarian as well as the Dateline producer who's been connected to this case for 13 years about the twists and turns that were profiled in a Dateline episode on our station here just last month. In June 1996, the body of Angie Dodge, an 18-year-old described as smart, fun, and loving, was found in her Idaho Falls apartment. She'd been strangled and sexually assaulted. An investigation led police to Chris Tapp, a friend of Angie's. Although he eventually confessed, his DNA didn't match what was collected at the scene, and during questioning, he didn't seem to know much about the crime. That prompted Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, to start her own investigation, eventually becoming convinced Chris Tapp was innocent.
She was just never going to be stopped. Never going to be stopped until she found the person who killed her daughter.
Carol sought help from an expert in false confessions who reviewed police interviews with Chris and called it the worst case of, quote, police contamination and fact-feeding he'd seen. Carol also found a genetic genealogist and convinced her to examine the DNA found at the scene of her daughter's death to try to determine the identity of the real killer.
I don't think I'd even heard of genetic genealogy in 2011. I mean, that really started coming to the forefront in 2014, 15. I'm convinced almost anything can be solved by genetic genealogy now.
The genealogist Carol found started searching for matches on popular ancestry sites. She found one, a very distant relative, and started building family trees, looking for a possible connection. There was one family with ties to Kirksville, Missouri that looked promising, but they ran into a dead end. So that team reached out to the library at Truman State University to see if there were any records that could show a missing family member who wasn't showing up in the family history of a likely match.
It was a pretty generic phone call 5 years ago, so nothing that stood out to me.
At the time, librarian Daniel Titus didn't know why he was searching for an obituary. In fact, it wasn't until Dateline aired their latest episode a little over a month ago, he realized the role he'd played in helping solve a 2 decades old mystery.
The fact that just a small portion of what we did was able to help with that. Because you don't think anything you do on a day-to-day basis, for the most part of the library, is going to have a major effect like that.
The obit Daniel found identified a man who was a part of the family tree the genealogist first identified, but he didn't show up in the initial search because he used his stepdad's last name. A DNA sample from a cigarette butt would later link that man, Brian Drips, to the DNA found at the scene. Ultimately, Chris Tapp was exonerated with Dateline in attendance.
I've been to a few of these exonerations. We've helped a few people get out. These are top 10 life moments. I always say as a reporter or producer, when you stop crying, it's time to get out of the business. And we were shedding a few tears that day.
As for the role Daniel played, he's gained a new level of notoriety on Truman State University's campus.
A lot of our students that work for us here at the library had to ask me a lot of questions. They were very impressed at the time. My wife's a huge fan of true crime as well as my mom, so both of them were very excited for me to be involved in something like this.
We do have to say, while it was somewhat of a happy ending for Carol, the same can't be said for Chris. As Dateline shared in last month's episode, Chris was badly injured in Las Vegas. He died from blunt force trauma a week later. It was a homicide. In fact, since that episode aired, police have since identified a suspect, a former Nevada congressional candidate, in Chris's death. If you'd like to read more about Tapp's death and find a link to Dateline's reporting, it was an excellent episode. Look for this story on our website, kshb.com.